Dr. Avinash Godbole from OP Jindal Global University from Sonipat. So let me first, take this opportunity, and I have this great honor in introducing Dr. Abhishek Singhvi. Honorable Singhvi is a senior three-time sitting member of Parliament. He is a former chairman, Parliamentary Standing Committee on Law and Justice. He was India's youngest designated senior advocate at 34 and India's youngest appointed additional solicitor general at the age of 37 in 1997. He is an author and columnist and a visible media personality. He is also the senior most serving national spokesperson of the Congress Party. His columns have appeared in India's two top English dailies and have been published as two books titled Candid Corner and Straight Talk, both with forewords written by former Prime Minister Dr. Manmohan Singh. He is also an occasional columnist in major Hindi dailies, Danik Bhaskar and Rajasthan Patrika. The Global Leader for Tomorrow Award by Economic Forum at Davos in 1999, Dr. Singhvi has been the opening lead speaker for the Treasury Congress benches in Parliament for almost every major debate from 2006 to 2013. He's been the common factor in almost all landmark Supreme Court cases, spanning constitutional law, corporate law, and arbitration, and several other subjects. He supports many charities, including the Prayas Center for Destitute Children and the Singhvi Scholarship at College, Cambridge. This is apart from the sterling work done by him over 12 years in Rajasthan from his MP Lads funds, supporting 400 projects in the field of health and education. I will introduce other speakers as and when their opportunity comes to speak. Right now, I would request Dr. Singhvi to be the chief guest of this event and to chair this session and to make his opening remarks for the day. Dr. Singhvi, the time is yours.
Thank you so much, Mr. Bipindra, for a very generous and hospitable introduction. My dear friends, panelists, all registrants, viewers, members of your organization, let me start with a confession. I am no diplomat. My father was temporarily a diplomat, and I told him my favorite quote about a diplomat when he was taking charge as India's what was to become longest serving High Commissioner, that a diplomat is defined as someone who can tell a person to go to hell in a manner in which that person starts looking forward to the journey. Now, obviously, my expertise in that area, as indeed in foreign affairs, is very limited. But being a lawyer and a spokesperson, some degree of persuasive talents, like a diplomat, have to be exercised. And in public life, one is supposed to be jack of all. So I venture into this, hopefully not like the idiom of venturing where angels fear to tread and fools walk freely. But how does it matter? Everybody in a democracy has a view, and I think I'm entitled to share my view with you, many of whom are experts on this subject. Friends, let me start by two sets of general points. The first is that this talk, these observations are politics neutral. They are ideology neutral. They are group neutral. The only thing they are not neutral about is India and China. This is intended to be a comprehensive wish list. And I believe that the nitty-gritty of what we can do concretely to recalibrate, reinvent, rethink, reimagine the India-China equation is what should take our time and energies. This is also, as you know, because for far too long have we fully or partly wished away reality. We have, in that sense, imagined a different reality than that which exists. One of those wishing away or imagining a different reality is our obsession with Pakistan. The fact that our long-term enemy sits right next to us has not fully either dawned or, if dawned, because it is there in the subconscious, has not fully been acted upon. We have also not realized that it is somewhere a question of two swords in a scabbard, the scabbard being Asia. एक म्यान में दो तलवार. And sometimes it's necessary to have two swords in a scabbard, but then there has to be forced respect and likability between the two. And like it or not, in realpolitik, in the real world, both respect and at least outward likability are consequences of fear. Now, we have certainly got that fear of China, either overtly or psychologically or subconsciously for decades. But we have not been able to generate a reciprocal fear of India in China, in the Chinese mind, because that alone will generate that respect and at least outward likability, which is going to be the solution for a new equilibrium between these two giants. That's my first set of general points. My second set of general points, and I can assure you, I don't intend to beat around the bush too long. I will come to the nitty-gritty of solutions. But these points are important, even though they may sound a bit general. The second set of points is that for this broad recalibration of this equation, we need more action and less talk. We need fewer lectures like this one and more implementation. Number two, the problem is not new and the panaceas are known. The question is consistency of application, be it for 3 years or 5 years. Focus of will, grit, determination. Thirdly, we have to follow, as in a lot of other things, Thomas Hardy's dictum. You take care of the small things, the big things will take care of themselves. It's something which is remarkably simple and remarkably observed in the absence or in the violation. Fourthly, the fourth general point in my second set of points is that your approach has to be holistic, not piecemeal. It has to be not partial. It can't be episodic, knee jerk. And it has to be both curative and preventive. So, this holistic is important. As I'm going to deal and demonstrate to the extent possible that our strategy to combat China should be comprehensive and balanced. It should strike a perfect balance on the economic front, on the strategic front, on the diplomatic front, on the military front, on several other fronts. And the last 2 points in the second set of points is that most important is the non-measurable, non-quantifiable, non-statistical element, attitudinal change. Attitudinal change is the most important. Amongst Indians, amongst Indian government, amongst Indian stakeholders, bureaucrats, etc., because as somebody said, attitude, not aptitude, determines altitude, namely how high you soar in this China-India equation. And lastly, I cannot possibly emphasize the importance of teamwork. Teamwork includes consensus. It includes a broadly agreed momentum, direction, content, all things. You have to, nobody can ever bridge it completely, but you have to largely bridge, first recognize and then bridge the trust deficit. You have to reach out and take into confidence even those whom you may politically or otherwise hate. You have to not make this a personalized thing. It is not about the personal ego or image or standing of any person or institution. It is about India in the context of China. And you have to not suppress, conceal, distort. And you know that these things can be done by spin, by distrust, by misrepresentation. You have to be a certain degree of candor and frankness, including the recognition, be it in private, not necessarily in public domain, of shortcomings and failures, because that builds up the trust and also gives you solutions. Now, in case you people are thinking I am beating around the bush for too long, let's come to my 4 or 5 heads of as nitty gritty a set of solutions as I can think of. And I would rather like to think of myself as a layman, though I am in public life and I do deal with diplomacy and foreign affairs subjects. I do deal with law. I do deal with the media. But at the end of the day, for a subject like this, I think it's important to have the outsiders, or at least the outsider insider view. Firstly, let us look at the military head. Uh, One must remember what Lee Kuan Yew said about China. I quote, he said, China is not going to become a liberal democracy. So don't romanticize China. If it did, it would collapse. You cannot impose on other countries standards which are alien to them and totally disconnected with their past. So keep that in mind as a permanent factor. Secondly, I personally don't set much store by the military option, except to generate the requisite fear, keep the balance, keep our forces human, non human, at the maximum which your economy can afford, keep the adversary always under a certain degree of fear and doubt as to the strike capability, and therefore maintain the balance. I am not thinking of the military option with a giant like China as conquests. I am not thinking of that option in the same vein, in the same tone as I would think, for example, and I have no hesitation naming it, Pakistan. Thirdly, under the military option, I think the tragic part today, as we speak, is that there was always an LAC. I mean, there is some dispute about it, but there was a concept of an LAC. What has now happened is, as we speak, and for the last several months, that LAC has not only been crossed, but post withdrawal, the areas which were considered our part of the LAC have become so called buffer zones. I think this is the crux in two simple sentences of what China has gained. So the gain is, I enter your 3 rooms, I vacate 2 of them, and I keep one of your rooms, not myself, but as a buffer zone. That reality, and I don't want to get into details, whether it is partly in Galwan, whether it is partly in Pangso, is something which we should constantly protest against. And I'm now talking, keep the military vigil up, and of course in the other senses when I come to diplomatically and otherwise. This crux has to be accepted by the government. It has to be shared in whatever way, degree, content, etc. they want with not only their own departments and ministries, and that is a bit of a tragedy if the government, in a false self-image game, is not doing that, but also with select segments of the opposition. And the focus of all these stakeholders has to be to restore the status quo ante, where these buffer zones are not zones sitting in our land. The Mountain Strike Corps, which I think was an excellent initiative, it was an initiative of the UPA, and made progress, but did not make the full requisite progress during that time. It could have been faster. Has unfortunately suffered a huge decline in the last 5 years. I think we need to enhance it exponentially. If you like, you can rename it. If you like, you can appropriate, claim its ownership. But for God's sake, do not dilute it or abandon it. It's an excellent scheme, particularly China focused, and it should in fact be expanded right across the northwest to southeast garland, which is our border with China. I know that with a declining economy, with a COVID pandemic scourge, these are like sledgehammer attacks on already weak defense budgets. But I would still urge our government, and again, as I said, this is not, it's politics neutral largely, to significantly enhance the consistently declining defense budget, which is now somewhere below 1.5% of GDP. And there has been a decline, a secular decline. Now you can juggle with statistics, you can talk about real and price based, but the secular decline has to be controlled, and a certain degree of enhancement has to be, this trend has to be reversed. The next point under the military head is that our engagements, our interoperability exercises with entities like US must become, of course, increased in frequency, expanded in scope, and more open, more brazen. I don't think we have to be defensive about it. I don't think we have to be kind of shy about it. We are not becoming a vassal state of the US, but the show of strength, along with other strong giants, is one of the established military practices, which we are doing in a small way, but we need to enhance it. We must, and we are doing it already, but to show to China, to snook a nose at China, accelerate the completion of the all-weather Darbuk Daulat Beg Oldie Road, the very famous road you know about. We must, in fact, activate and complete a landing ground, what is known as an ALG in the vicinity. And very important is to enhance the somewhat fragile structure. And we have, I believe, people from Arunachal Pradesh who are better qualified than me. But I would like to still think of it as a fragile and incoherent infrastructure of Arunachal Pradesh as far as military issues are concerned. So this is my overall wish list. As I said, do not put too much store by the military option in terms of overwhelming the opponent. But yes, I do believe that it is an important option to keep it on its toes, to keep guessing, to have fear, and to realize that we will not hesitate in our retaliation. Let me end by saying that China appears to have done something which has gone relatively unnoticed in India as far as the military scheme is concerned. And that is to unleash a drone armory. I have the names here. Several, strike UAVs, ground attack reconnaissance, precision strike ones, electronic warfare UAVs, all kinds of drone armory. I think it's time we took note of it. I think these are not rocket science. Of course, we should be self-dependent, self-manufacturing and self-dependent on this. But for the time being, it can easily be enhanced and reinforced in our armory. They seem to be working well for China, and especially the inhospitable terrain we are talking about. The importance of drone warfare and armory cannot and should not be underestimated. That's my wish list for the military option. Let's now turn to the much maligned and the ones I pulled legs on, the diplomatic option. The option, as they said, of handling a porcupine without disturbing the quills. One of the other definitions of diplomacy, or acting in a way, the art of letting someone else have your way. Well, firstly, under the diplomatic head, I think it is frequently underestimated. It is not dramatic, it is not flamboyant, it is not immediate in terms of results, but its importance, its effect should never be underestimated. Secondly, in the diplomatic head, I believe that the power to name and shame is again understood, underestimated. Naming and shaming across the globe, bilateral meets, international meets, trilateral meets, multilateral meets, is a vital tool in your armory. And I would expect India to unleash a blitzkrieg. And in its blitzkrieg, it should not hesitate to name and shame for this event. I think diplomacy permits it. It's a fact. See, for example, the way Mr. Mike Pompeo speaks. The forthrightness. I don't say I'm agreeing with a lot of what he says. I also know that when his master completes the election this way or that way, much of this ardor will wane. But I'm just saying the forthrightness with which a issue is taken up by Mike Pompeo. I think it's a lesson in our diplomacy blitzkrieg, which is still, I think, not reached the stage of a blitzkrieg. It must be given a greater push, and we must leverage, exploit the current anti-China wave, fortunately, sweeping the whole globe. I don't think I have seen ever any such time with this degree in a kind of a consistent, uniform manner. And I think India needs to leverage and exploit that. I think we also need, and it's a very interesting article by a former admiral just a few days ago, to focus on all these things which you know about. The 4 or 5 major names are the ASEAN extension, which you call the East Asia Summit now, because you are trying to add India, Australia, and Russia to it, to the ASEAN. So when I say ASEAN, I mean that, not the core ASEAN. Then the Quad, the 4 country combination. Then you have the Malabar, which is the annual naval exercise alternatively in the Indian and Pacific Oceans. And then you have the Democracy 10, which is basically G7 with some additions. Now, these are regional, partial, multilateral groupings which have today and are of great use in the China equation. But I want to make the point which Arun Prakash, the former admiral, has made. I think to the extent that we have some asymmetry militarily with China on the land and the traditional defense forces, that is manpower, machines, land based, or even air based, I think that asymmetry is much less on our ocean and water frontiers. And for many of these, the joint exercises, the patrolling, the policing, the up and downs in the Pacifics and the Indian Ocean areas, and several other things which we all know about, that asymmetry converts into a naval equality or superiority for India when we combine with these entities. So these words I use, Quad, ASEAN, Malabar, etc., all have resonance also from the point of view of the ocean, where I think China is more vulnerable and also is more adventurous and needs to be controlled. On the Quad, I am disappointed that a former Australian Prime Minister, to use a crude, non diplomatic word, ditched us. Kevin Rudd. I think a Quad is a very, very important formation, and I'm glad that after his departure, this was way back in 2008 and 10, we are now reformulating and reconfiguring, and I think it should be made into a consistency. Australia's zigzags have to be ironed out with us and with the US and with Japan. But the Quad has lost some years from the Kevin Rudd time of 2008 when he partly jettisoned us to kind of ingratiate himself with China. So I think we have the right move there to kind of reintegrate that. We also have to, in the diplomatic head, which I'm on, use the 2 T's fully, the Tibet and the Taiwan T's. Leveraging, exploiting, much, much more so than we are doing. Now, Tibet, the glory and the divinity of the Dalai Lama is underestimated even today in Tibet. I think we have to pull out all the stops in giving the Dalai Lama his rightful place. Now, take for example the restrictions put on the Dalai Lama, or for that matter, on visitors. And we have a Uyghur community guest here, and we know what happened to Dolkan Isa's visa. My point is that the government of India today, in the climate we are, can have a simple rule: no violent or insurrectionary activities against China will be permitted here. But short of that, political statements, declarations, seminars, visits, meetings, not of government, but of organizations. I give you just 3 examples. Richard Gere, I forgot to add, one of the most iconic figures of Bollywood, Hollywood. His visits, Dolkan Isa's visit. Now, we're not concerned about Dolkan Isa, what he does and says, as long as he does not do violent activities on Indian soil. But if he has a view, a democratic view about the Uyghur community in East Turkestan or Xinjiang, then I don't understand, especially in the current context, the continuance of artificial restrictions that you can come or you cannot come. You cannot get a visa or you can get a visa. If you come, you can speak this much and not that much. I think these are niceties which China itself has blown to smithereens. When China opposes you for that Pakistan-based terrorist, when China opposes you for the nuclear supply thing, and when China does what it has done now, I think it will have no face to reinsist on these niceties. And we will be within our international law rights saying that we are not permitting anti-China activities. We are the world's largest democracy. We are not like China, and we are allowing a unrestricted use of force, free speech within the parameters of our constitution. 19(1)(a) in our country has to be available to speakers here so long as they don't do the exceptions or the reasonable restrictions put on 19(1)(a) rights. So I think the boundary line, the red flag, has to be nothing covert or overt which is violent or anti-China, but speech itself of an exercise of platform, democratic platforms to bring grievances to right cannot fall in that category. That recalibration we must do. As far as Taiwan is concerned, I think we must unhesitatingly elevate and enhance to full diplomatic status. Uh, by the way, Taiwan manufactures a lot of things we get from China. And I'm happy to note that we have increased our trade from 66 million US dollars to 6 billion, as in B, with Taiwan. Today, the big names you find coming here, for example, the biggest subcontractors of Apple who are all coming from Taiwan. And they're all Taiwanese companies: Foxconn, Winstron, Pegatron. I've got 3 names, there must be many more. And ultimately, our shyness qua Taiwan must also end, because we are not permitting Taiwan to do anything militarily or otherwise physically against China. But certainly, we need today to send these messages, and you are underestimating the power of these multiple messages. When done consistently over years, the synergy is much, much more than we tend to think of. Friends, then I think our criticism has to be more vocal, more diverse, and more comprehensive. It has to be more vocal in the sense of the Belt Road Initiative. China has now unleashed a plan of made in China by 2025. They've unleashed a plan of China standards in 2035. We have resisted some of this, but we must be more vocal about our resistance, which is happening, but still not sufficiently. Pointing out why these are colonial imperialistic designs couched in economic assistance in another way. I must put a note of caution here. I don't agree at all with what we have done with our Russia relationship. It's our oldest all-weather ally. We must leverage the US relationship, especially till the Trump elections, but that cannot be at the cost of Russia. Let me tell you that Russia has the closest China relations perhaps ever in its last 30, 40 years. It's a new development. It is even inching closer to Pakistan. These are 2 developments I'm horrified at. It is partly happening because while promoting our US relationships, we are not necessarily massaging our Russia relationship adequately. As I always say, that just like Pakistan has a dragon in India's backyard to put some pressure on us, Pakistan's protection. That dragon is, of course, China. India needs a dinosaur in China's backyard, and that dinosaur has to be Russia. There's no other country which can be in the dragon's backyard. I think this is an imbalance we must set right immediately. It's something which can cost us dear. I think Russia needs to be and can be reassured that when we have closer interaction with USA, it is nothing to do with Russia. And I think once we right this imbalance, the 2 emerging dangerous features I mentioned, closer proximity of Russia to China, and indeed much lesser so though, but closer proximity to Pakistan as well, is something we have to be aware of first and combat. Every small thing counts in the diplomatic bag. We have become the president of WHO recently, a little noticed fact. I don't see any hesitation in whatever way we can at the UN to use that presidency to look into corona issues with China, not necessarily to convict them, but to initiate. And that can and should go over the head even of a hesitant chief executive of WHO who has to follow the instructions ultimately if India has assumed the presidency. We are also underexploiting other disgruntled countries, China. I'm not talking of Australia and Japan, which comes under the Quad, but I'm certainly talking of Philippines, Indonesia, and Vietnam. Vietnam, you'll be surprised to know, has had many skirmishes for a country of its size, many skirmishes already with China. They don't like China and they're a brave country. They had a 2014 standoff, what is known as the Hai Yang Shui incident, oil rig incident. They've had Spratly Islands incidents. They've had several others. Philippines is another country that is constantly disturbed by Chinese incursion. And the Philippines, all again small countries, fought a brave arbitration against the Chinese on their so-called nine dash line in the on the law of the sea issue. China refused to appear before the arbitral tribunal and they lost an award the tribunal held. In particular, I'm quoting that China has no historical rights on the nine dash line map. China, of course, has rejected the ruling. But the point is that countries like Philippines, Indonesia, Vietnam, again, this is apart from Japan and China, have to be leveraged much more than they are being. As I said, the Buddhist diplomacy is another way of needling, pricking, and irritating China beyond their limits, especially one of the two T's, Tibet. Without dealing with Tibet, Buddhist diplomacy across the whole arc of Buddhism in Asia and East Asia creates a resonance which actually directly impinges on Tibet. And this extends from Southeast Asia to North Asia or East Asia onwards to Tibet. We are doing it in a small way, intra-Indian tourism. That's not what I mean. I mean, as a part of our foreign policy, Buddhist diplomacy, to resonate the Tibet issue. That's a very indirect and effective way of doing it. Then our friend the Uyghurs, the Xinjiang area, and I'm sure we have experts here who will speak about it, but this 1949 occupation of the East Turkestan, I don't think India can directly be involved in it because we have our J&K problems in terms of being needled and hurt. I'm quite aware of that. But again, we have not been able to contain China in being against us on every forum or fora, J&K. We have not been able to contain China in being brazen and egregious, that terrorist who lives in Pakistan and who cannot be declared as a terrorist. So we have already not got anything from China, in which case it's time, as I said, to promote visits by people like Dolkanisa, talks and functions by them, parliamentary bodies or partly parliamentary and non-parliamentary bodies like Friends of Uyghurs. You have that for Tibetans. I was very intrigued to know that in June 2020, the European Parliament created an inter-parliamentary alliance on China. And that's not based on parliamentarians alone. And they've expanded it to US, Germany, UK, Japan, Australia, Canada, Sweden, Norway, European Parliament, more than 100 MPs. The biggest focus of this inter-parliamentary alliance is China's unacceptable expansionist policies. India should have some role in it, should join or have some consultative status in it. These are all steps which are within the law, but they send a clear message, globally and more importantly, directly to China. And it's the multi-pronged approach of this, the holistic, which makes a difference. Let me turn now to a very important area, the third head, economic. Now in economic, we have taken steps which are pinching China. I'll just divide my economic point into 4 or 5 quick points. One is we have to calibrate a thought out strategy to identify soft targets like Chinese investments, which can even be cancelled. Now, don't have a blanket approach. Don't start wailing and lamenting China, 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 and just anything Chinese is attacked by you. Calibrated, focused, soft targets. Now, the moment you say that, the objection is, well, there are bilateral investment treaties, which are BITs, BITS, and you can be sued by China. As a lawyer, I've examined some of them. Let me assure you that As you know, they have a triple test, which I'll not go into in law, for which a country whose investment is expropriated can claim huge damages and redress. But all of them, and I'm sure this will apply, have a established derogation which protects India. They all call it the Essential Security Interest, ESI measure. So that's why you have to calibrate and focus. And where you can show that you are doing this cancellation or abrogation of investment for essential security interest measure, the bits will hold in your favor because it gives a large discretionary zone to the country invoking ESI. And there are several areas. One of them are the apps where there is a security issue, but many more where this should be looked at. Import substitution is important. It's not easy with China. Let's not kid ourselves. But uh, again, you have to micro look. As I said, take care of the small things. Thomas Hardy, big things will take care of themselves. Don't have blanket approaches. Vivek Devroy wrote a nice piece just, I think, 1 week ago or 4 days ago. He said, take, for example, uh, you cannot just abolish, but take, for example, the classification. Now, the classification has a 2-digit classification for some products and a 4-digit one. And he gives a good example. A 2-digit is toys, comma, games, comma, sports. That is, I'm talking of import substitution. A 4-digit classification under that, under toys, for example, says wheeled toys and then says tricycles, scooters, pedal cars, and other wheeled toys. Now, there's a vast difference by saying we stop all toys from China versus focusing on a 4-digit classification and asking the question which Debroy asks, and I quote him: Indian economy will presumably not collapse if wheeled toys, that's the 4-digit level, are not imported from China. So there are lots and lots of things which are not going to collapse in India if you don't import from China. But you need to go into the 4 level and the 6 level digitization at the micro level. Then again, China's economy is based on an artificial booster. It's the only country in the world, perhaps, where the cost of land is zero, close to zero, or very low. Land can be taken without asking you. There are no land acquisition problems. And it can be supplied free when they want, some low charge when they want. That's a huge benefit. So there is a huge subsidy in everything Chinese. We cannot easily combat it. But if that subsidy component in some products is 15%, and it is so, in some it is much higher, which you can't combat. But if it's 15%, then if you can do anti-dumping up to that 15% level, and then remove that anti-dumping and go and buy 15% more expensive from a country which has an import substitute. You are anyway putting anti-dumping because you have to combat China. Slowly over time, you can remove anti-dumping, and even if it is up to 10 to 15% more expensive elsewhere, you can buy it. This kind of calibrated approach is important. Selective boycotting is permissible. It can happen, should happen. And the most ironical thing is China has itself done it. It has repeatedly done it by itself. And China does it by selective. It did it against products from Thailand, from South Korea, etc., from Indonesia. And I think we need to be clear about boycotting, but again in a micro way. So my point here is that judiciously crafted, focused, targeted mix of import substitution, discriminatorily skewed tariffs, steep anti-dumping duties, and of course, apart from bans in some areas. This can send another set of clear messages. And let me assure you that these are not WTO breach. They don't fall foul. I have written in my article recently, which was published, that there are judgments under WTO, Australia, Canada, Salmon case of 2000, where if you are able to show that in sufficiently comparable situations, the treatment was scientifically justifiable, then it will be upheld. There are judgments also in the Argentina Brazil case, poultry anti dumping, that though it had been levying skewed levies, it was not in violation of WTO. So we need to be a little adventurous. We have nothing to lose but our inhibitions, and we have to examine them in a micro manner. Then, lastly, on the economy, I think, as I said, the India China asymmetry arises from another different thing which we must leverage. China's economic success is based on something which is unilateral, which is export based. It is only now becoming slowly domestic consumer demand based. It's mainly export based. India's economy is driven by consumer demand, domestic, and export base is a much smaller factor than China. Obviously, the Chinese and the Indians attract each other like magnets. If you can break this symmetry, namely a big consumer demand here attracting the Chinese export impetus, if we can jam and repel this, then you have achieved a very important achievement because China remains a heavily export dependent economy. Let me end now. I possibly exceeded my time. I'll end in about 2 or 3 minutes or 4 minutes. By one factor which is not talked about, which has been ignored, but which I think is very important. And this is my last point. It'll take 3 or 4 minutes. We've talked of military, diplomatic, economic, foreign affairs, etc., etc. We should not forget the personality driven ambience of what is happening in China today. We should not, in one word, forget the personality of Xi, President Xi Jinping. Under our nose, without us even noticing it, the following things have happened, which even the press has largely ignored. President Xi has become China's supreme unquestioned leader, and many believe that he has cult status even exceeding that of Mao. And I'm choosing my words very clearly, I'm not exaggerating. Vijay Gokhale, our foreign ambassador to China, has written a nice piece on this recently, and I'm taking some points from him to point out how it has happened in the last 8 years barely. Very short time. He became General Secretary in 2012 or so. He has purged or sidelined almost all opponents in all spheres in China, present and potential. The policy which they call in China taking down tigers and flies, that's quote unquote the Chinese policy, has purged hundreds of officials who were perceived to be close to the predecessors of President Xi. Two entities, the security apparatus is very important there. It is controlled by the People's Armed Police, PAP. It's like the Gestapo. It is now directly under the command of President Xi. And very importantly, he is the commander-in-chief of the PLA. And he has removed generals like Zhang Yang and Fang Fenghui, who were the major icons of this army. Now remember, even Mao, at the peak of his power, although perhaps he could have done it, did not make himself commander-in-chief of PLA. Very few people know this. The reserve forces of China are also under the direct command, and this all happened in the last 7-8 years. The clause which prevented him from continuing as president beyond 2023 has been abrogated. He can continue indefinitely. You have Putin 1, Putin 2, Putin 3, Putin 4, reincarnated as President Xi, I am sure, after 2023. New guidelines on political life are replacing the guidelines of Deng Xiaoping, which were there in 1982. So 40-year-old are replaced by President Xi's guidelines now. And in the universities of China, the Chinese dream is being taught, which is compiled as the sayings or the elements of President Xi. Therefore, I would say that remember President Xi's one of his rare interviews, and I'll end on this. And you must remember that this is the person you are dealing with at Galwan, at Pangso. This is your adversary. Unless you know your adversary, the human flesh, blood, tissues, you cannot formulate your policy. He said in an interview, he said, if you want to become a general, you must be able to win a battle. We do not have battles every day, especially in times of peace. But only if there are battles does it give opportunity to show how you can succeed. It's a remarkable statement, and it gives you an idea why battles can be created, initiated, prolonged, etc. So, unless you know